Culuc's decoration is actually kinda simple if you look into it. These blocks may look really detailed and complex, but everything here is made with fairly simple objects like 3D lines, circles, and rock objects. What makes Culuc special though is how good he is at illusion. He has developed a good sense for not only what objects look good, but also how to stack them to make things look incredibly interesting and complex. For example, these blocks in Edge of Destiny use a variety of objects. You can see animated objects with an invisible color channel, circle objects like these ones in the detail tab, and some gradient lines that are also in the editor's detail tab. On its own, this combination already looks fairly complex, but he's also stacked these objects on top of rock outlines, and there's glow in between these two which makes these neat gradients that you see in the deco. What makes these parts complex often isn't the individual details, but the fact that there's so many layers of decoration stacked on each other. In Edge of Destiny, you have a block design layer with the blocks, these asteroids, and the lighting on top of the blocks, and then you have a background made of the main star, layers of asteroids in front of it, and other stars behind it. Most of these are, again, made of fairly simple objects, like the asteroids, which are the same as the rocks used in Finger Dash. For the more complex details though, Culuc often reuses these in multiple places, which saves lots of time you would spend manually placing them down. For example, these blocks in his KOCMOC Unleashed part have some complex details that are reused in many places. What's important though is that he's not just copy-pasting the same details everywhere. Well, I mean, he did do that for Edge of Destiny, but just pretend it doesn't exist for a moment. These details are reused, but there's always a good amount of variety in the part so it doesn't get boring or obvious. In KOCMOC Unleashed, while some blocks share the same details on the insides, the actual structure shapes are constantly changing, so you don't notice this. In Edge of Destiny, the structures are more similar to each other, but the main focus is on the 6 supernova happening in the background, so you again don't notice repetition. Plus, the structures here also move and rotate in different directions, which makes their placement in the part more varied and interesting. Glow is also something Culuc uses a lot to make things look more complex. If you look at something like his Abyssal Extinction part, there are lots of different glow objects used here, like on the saws and on objects like the spikes or flames. The same goes for his remake of Aerial Gleam, where the animated objects inside the blocks also have glow stacked on top of them. This is because glow creates gradients, which let you cycle through tons of colors and look more interesting. It's a lot cooler to have a neat gradient on your blocks compared to just one color, since there's, again, more variety to look at. Glow also lets you make certain things act as light sources, since real life objects also have the same glowing effect you can see here. You can actually make this effect for yourself by taking any object and giving it some color, then stacking glow on top that's a bit darker and more saturated. This can also be done multiple times to create a light source that's more vibrant and interesting to look at. Using glow objects in this way highlights these objects as the most important details, ones which you should be looking at in the part. And another reason why the glow works so well here is because of the colors Culuc uses. There's almost always lots of saturated, vibrant colors in the most important deco, and the least important things are always darker and less saturated. Everything in between sits somewhere on the scale depending on how important they are. For example, these blocks in Edge of Destiny stand out because of the bright details inside them, but not as much as the bright star in the background. The blocks also have darker parts which stand out well against the star, keeping the gameplay readable even with a lot going on. Later on in the part, he also uses color changes to keep the gameplay readable. The saws are darker whenever the black hole is visible so they actually show up, and the saws glow whenever the background is dark. This keeps the deco readable even while lots of color changes occur, and it's something you see in many of his parts. A good reason for this is so these parts don't look overbearing. It's important to have some contrast so your deco is actually interesting, but having too much can turn out overwhelming for viewers. If I up the contrast on his waterfall part, for example, it now looks way too bright and actually feels a bit worse since it's harder to spot the block designs against the background. This also occurs if I lower the contrast so now it feels gray and washed out. Furthermore, it's important with complex decoration like this emerald realm part. There is a lot of stuff going on here, and not every detail can stand out at once. Just in this screenshot alone, you have multiple layers of grass and spikes in the foreground, lots of layers in the blocks, connector objects behind the blocks, Culuc the frog, and tons of other layers in the background. So to manage this, Culuc adds some glow to the player's path when hitting the dash orb, and darkens everything else in the area. He also uses glow here to highlight the upcoming gameplay, while other objects are darkened in comparison. There are also lots of glow overlays which pulse at certain points to again, highlight certain things and make the deco more interesting. Now, it can be kinda tough to keep all this in mind when decorating. After all, it's already tough to make one block design interesting on its own, and the more deco you add, the more things you have to juggle. But if you want to improve, you should join our Discord server and get the guided access role to start practicing Deco today. However, just having detailed objects used and good colors isn't all there is to Culuc's Deco. If you look at his most popular levels, there's one final thing they all have in common. In Emerald Realm, you have the moon. In Edge of Destiny, it's a big star. KOCMOC Unleashed has the black hole, and Abyssal Extinction has the Astrum Aureus boss from Calamity. That's right, folks. More spacings equals mythic rates. You heard it here first. To be fair though, there is a good reason for it, and it's focal points. If you recall, I mentioned how Culuc uses the most contrast on the most important objects. The idea behind focal points is that you want viewers to look at those objects first, so they have the most contrast and are given the most attention on screen. Not just that, but the focal points in Culuc's Deco are interesting on their own. Objects like the moon, stars, and black holes have always been given lots of attention by humans at large, and they also just look good in general whenever they're added to something. Culuc could just stop at creating these things, but he also goes a step further and animates his deco around the focal points, which makes him stand out even more. The star in Edge of Destiny turns into a supernova halfway through the part, the moon in Emerald Realm helps transition to levels credits, and so on. With his Abyssal Extinction part, he took a well-known theme from Terraria's Calamity mod and used the most recognizable bosses in the decoration. The Astrum Aureus boss gets spawned in with this beam of light, and you also have Astrum Dias, which tunnels through the environment and breaks all sorts of things. In his second Dead of Night part, he also creates the Storm King from the real Fortnite, and also the end event from the Disney version of that game. The thing about these focal points is that they don't just make the parts look good, they also provide a single thing you can associate that part or level with. The deco isn't just good, it's also really memorable and bold, which is something a lot of creators can learn from. At the same time, Culuc is almost too good on his own. The combination of his specific object use, strong color contrast, and really memorable focal points means his deco always sticks out whenever it's in a level. If you're trying to make deco like him, you have to be careful not to simply copy what he does without analyzing these factors and decorating with purpose. Otherwise, you might end up replicating the Culuc effect. This happens in many collabs he joins, where once he showcases his part, other collab members try to replicate the feeling of his parts without actually using the same techniques and skills that make his deco stand out. You can see this happen in levels like KOCMOC Unleashed, where basically every part has a black hole and lots of shader usage. Edge of Destiny, where lots of parts use the same detailed object stacking and lightning effects. Black Flag, where every part has lightning and water in the exact same way Culuc's part does. And Emerald Realm, where half the parts made after Culuc's showcase use similar objects and have heavy inspiration from Ori. I totally didn't fall prey to this effect myself. No, I'm a skilled creator who can take inspiration on my own. However, this does highlight something important about Culuc, which is that you don't need to directly copy him to make use of the same skills he does. For one, improving your object choices will just make you better at building in general, and there are thousands of ways to combine objects to make deco. You can still use lots of object stacking without necessarily using the same objects that Culuc does. Same goes with your color use. You can make use of glow and saturated colors without using the same color scheme, and have plenty of color variety even if you don't use things like glow. And the same goes with your level ideas. Don't be afraid to make something ambitious when creating. The worst thing that happens is you make something you can learn from and improve on in the future. And in the best case scenario, you end up with something that stuns the GD community, just like what Culuc manages to do with his levels.